In 2024, something rare happened in Africa. Not a coup, not a strongman, but a vote. Senegal's youngest ever elected president came to power after violence, intimidation, and political manipulation failed to break the public will. Millions of citizens, especially the young, stood their ground and said, "We want democracy to work. We want dignity. We want jobs. We want life to be affordable again." For a brief moment, Senegal looked like a blueprint for the future, a youth-driven democratic correction in an era defined by decline. And then the numbers surfaced. $13 billion in hidden debt, a fiscal time bomb no one voted for, a reality that turns hope into austerity overnight. This is the uncomfortable truth of modern politics. You can win an election and still lose control of your destiny. If this kind of analysis matters to you, stay with me, because what's happening in Senegal isn't just local, it's structural. To understand why this promise is already under strain, we have to clarify what voters were actually demanding and what they unknowingly inherited. What Senegalese voters asked for was not radical, it was precise. They wanted affordability because daily life had become a constant negotiation with rising prices. They wanted accountability because corruption, real or perceived, had eroded trust in institutions. And they wanted jobs because a young, educated generation found itself waiting, stuck, and increasingly impatient. The election was not just a change of leadership. It was a demand for a new social contract. Bassirou Diomaye Faye and his movement spoke the language of dignity, fairness, and sovereignty. Dignity for youth who played by the rules but saw no reward. Fairness in insisting that power obey the same laws as everyone else. Sovereignty in redefining relationships with external partners to serve national development first. None of this on its face alarmed voters. It energized them. Senegal appeared to prove that democratic pressure could still produce peaceful change. But elections don't erase balance sheets. Promise, don't cancel obligations. And moral clarity does not neutralize financial gravity. The problem Senegal faces is not whether its demands were legitimate, it's whether those demands are compatible with the economic reality now revealed. To see how this contradiction took shape, we need to step back and look at how Senegal arrived here in the first place. For years, Senegal's stability rested on a quiet assumption that growth, credibility, and democratic legitimacy could advance together gradually without rupture. That assumption masked a vulnerability. Public finances expanded while scrutiny lagged, development ambitions grew faster than transparency, and debt accumulated not as a public debate, but as a technical background process managed, postponed, and ultimately obscured. This is how debt becomes political without ever appearing on a ballot. When borrowing funds development, it buys time. When it lacks transparency, it also buys silence. The cost is deferred until it isn't. At that point, history arrives not as a narrative, but as a number. The $13 billion revelation did not create Senegal's crisis. It revealed it. And it did so at the worst possible moment, right after voters had demanded relief, not restraint, opportunity, not austerity. Economic cycles don't respect electoral cycles. A new government inherits not just institutions, but obligations shaped by choices it didn't make and sometimes didn't even know about. This is the trap. Democratic renewal colliding with fiscal reality. Momentum meeting mathematics. And once the debt surfaced, the political temperature changed immediately. Because transparency doesn't just clarify problems, it detonates them. The moment the hidden debt came into view, it stopped being an accounting issue and became a political shockwave. $13 billion doesn't just downgrade a credit rating, it rewrites every promise made on the campaign trail. Overnight, Senegal shifted from a story of democratic renewal to a case study in fiscal shock. The government faced an immediate dilemma: acknowledge the scale of the problem and accept external restructuring, or reject the stigma of failure and insist on domestic solutions. The response was defiant. Senegal would not be treated like a failed state. Tax mobilization, leaders argued, was preferable to debt restructuring. On paper, that sounds resolute. In practice, it ignites a second crisis. When nearly 90% of the population works in the informal economy, tax extraction has limits. Push too hard, and you don't just raise revenue, you raise anger. Voters ask for a lower cost of living, not new fiscal pressure. Investors watch closely for signals of predictability, not improvisation. This is how a financial revelation turns combustible. Not because debt exists, but because every available response carries political risk. If you're still with me, pay attention here. This is the point where systems, not slogans, take over. Because beneath the surface, a deeper mechanism is now shaping every decision ahead. What's happening now is not chaos. It's a system revealing its rules. Debt narrows choice. It doesn't announce itself as an enemy, it quietly removes options. Every policy idea now passes through a filter that voters never see. Creditworthiness, investor confidence, fiscal credibility. Talk of sovereignty collides with markets that price risk, not rhetoric. Talk of fairness collides with a tax base that barely exists in formal terms. Talk of dignity collides with austerity that has no moral language, only arithmetic. This is the hidden mechanism at work. Governments squeezed between citizens who want relief and financial structures that demand restraint. Leaders inherit a legitimacy surplus from the ballot box, but a legitimacy deficit in bond markets. And here's the paradox. Resisting debt restructuring may preserve national pride, but it also concentrates pain internally. Raising taxes in an informal economy doesn't just fail, it fractures trust. Signaling hostility toward private investment doesn't punish capital. It makes it leave. None of this requires bad intentions. It requires constraints. Once debt dominates the system, politics stops being about vision and becomes about damage control. The question is no longer what leaders want to do, but what they are allowed to do. And that's when pressure stops being abstract and starts tearing alliances apart. Pressure does not stay contained. It looks for weak points. In Senegal, that pressure has begun to expose fractures at the very top. The unity that powered a historic electoral victory is now strained by suspicion, blame, and uncertainty. When a crisis has no obvious culprit, everyone becomes a potential one. Finger-pointing spreads. Who knew about the debt? Who signed off? Who benefited or stayed silent? These questions don't just circulate in the media. They circulate inside government, inside alliances that were built for opposition, not austerity. This is the second mini-crisis. Not financial, but political. Markets read instability faster than citizens do. Investors don't wait for official statements. They watch tone, cohesion, hesitation. And every visible rift amplifies doubt. What began as a hidden debt problem is now a credibility problem. At the same time, citizens are watching something else. Leaders who spoke with one voice now speaking past each other. The moral clarity of the campaign is giving way to the ambiguity of governance. This is how reform moments decay, not through betrayal, but through stress. And when that stress reaches society at large, the consequences become personal. Senegal's crisis is now a matter of impact, not just for the leaders, but for the people. The debt, the political infighting, the fiscal pressure, they all have faces. Faces of young people who voted for hope, not hardship. Faces of families struggling to make ends meet. Faces of workers who already know the informal economy offers no security, no benefits, no future beyond survival. This is where the urgency becomes palpable. It's not just a theoretical debate anymore. It's about the daily struggle to make rent, to pay for food, to afford healthcare. It's about the fact that no matter what happens in the halls of government, it's the citizens who bear the cost. Theirs is the sacrifice, not the politicians. Faye and Sonko may argue over the solution, but it is the youth, those who gave the mandate to the government in the first place, who will be the most affected by this divide. In Senegal's cities and towns, it's already clear. The people are frustrated. They feel betrayed. The path forward is clear, but it is hard. To rebuild trust, the government will need to deliver not on grand promises, but on real, concrete changes. Affordable living, a path to stable, dignified jobs, a clear fiscal roadmap that doesn't hurt the very people it was meant to help. It's not a matter of tax rates or investment alone. It's about how the people feel, seen, heard, and above all cared for. But Senegal is not just looking inward, it's part of a global system. The effects of the debt crisis won't stop at the borders. Senegal's dilemma is, in a sense, a microcosm of a wider trend across the African continent and beyond. Governments squeezed between the demands of their citizens and the harsh realities of international debt markets. The tension between sovereignty and external influence. The struggle to balance growth with fiscal responsibility. And the problem is not just local. It's regional, geopolitical. Senegal's debt burden does not just hurt its own prospects. It puts Africa's relationship with the rest of the world on notice. As one of the continent's most stable democracies, Senegal was viewed as an example for others to follow. But what happens when the model breaks? When a country like Senegal, a democracy, a beacon of hope, is trapped by its debts, it signals to the international community that something needs to change, and it calls on the world to take responsibility for the systemic issues fueling this crisis. The lack of international debt relief, the inequities in global fiscal policies, the inability to tackle the true scale of debt crises faced by developing nations. Senegal may be the most visible right now, but it's not alone. And if international actors don't act quickly and decisively, the rest of the continent may soon face similar battles, ones that may not end as peacefully. The future is now a matter of three possible scenarios, each defined by the choices Senegal makes in the coming months. The best-case scenario, Senegal negotiates a way forward, not just internally, but with external partners. Debt restructuring, carefully managed, relieves pressure without damaging national sovereignty. Foreign investment returns, encouraged by clear, predictable policies. Domestic reforms create a path for job creation, affordability, and public trust. The country becomes a symbol of resilience, how democracy and fiscal responsibility can coexist, how nations can withstand pressure without breaking. The middle ground scenario, Senegal limps through the crisis. Debt restructuring is delayed, and the economy continues to stagnate with austerity measures and rising tensions. The political fissures deepen as parties squabble over blame, and the public grows increasingly disillusioned. Jobs remain scarce, and the cost of living continues to rise, but the country avoids complete collapse. Senegal's path becomes more uncertain, a fragile balance between survival and further decay. The worst-case scenario. Debt pressures force Senegal into a deeper economic crisis. Domestic policies fail to address the underlying issues, and the informal economy continues to evade taxation. Foreign investment dries up, and the public, once energized by democratic hopes, grows angry and disillusioned. Senegal's credit rating hits rock bottom, and international actors lose patience, turning away from what was once a promising nation. The country becomes a cautionary tale, a democracy undone by debt and bad decisions, unable to recover the trust it once commanded. The future of Senegal is unwritten, but it will be determined by the intersection of politics, finance, and public will. And so we come to the final insight. What lessons can we draw from Senegal's struggle? This is a moment not just for Senegal, but for all nations that believe they can balance the demands of their citizens with the limits imposed by a global economic system. The tension between sovereignty and fiscal reality is universal, especially for emerging democracies and economies still finding their place in the world. At the core, this is a test of leadership. How well can those in power navigate the intersection of public expectation and economic constraint? How can nations like Senegal preserve their sovereignty while also confronting the cold realities of their debt burdens? But there's more at stake than just economic recovery. This is also a test of the international system's capacity to evolve. Debt relief, transparency, and fairness aren't just talking points. They are essential to avoiding the collapse of more democratic experiments across the globe. The global community can no longer afford to ignore the systemic inequities that fuel debt crises, especially in countries like Senegal, which have shown the will to push forward. Senegal's crisis isn't just its own, it's a global one. A warning for all of us who believe in democratic governance, in fiscal responsibility, and in the shared future of emerging economies. If we ignore the lessons here, we risk not just the failure of one country, but the failure of a broader experiment in democratic renewal. Call to action. The next move is not just for Senegal to make, it's for all of us. How long will the international community wait before seriously addressing debt relief and fiscal justice for nations like Senegal? The choice is ours, and it's urgent. This moment in Senegal, though steeped in crisis, presents us with a critical opportunity. It is an opportunity to rethink how we approach global debt, fiscal policy, and the balance between sovereignty and international influence. What happens in Senegal will not stay in Senegal. It will shape the future of democracies in Africa and beyond. How the world responds to this moment will set the tone for the next wave of global political struggles. Senegal's young population has already demonstrated what is possible when people stand united behind the principles of democracy. But the ultimate challenge is to ensure that their struggle for dignity, fairness, and sovereignty does not end in despair. If their government can find a way to honor the promise of their election while navigating the fiscal minefield they now face, Senegal could emerge as a beacon of hope and resilience. But if the international community continues to ignore the systemic problems of debt and fiscal inequality, then we risk not only Senegal's future, but the future of many nations grappling with similar challenges. This is where global solidarity must meet local resilience. It's not just about debt restructuring. It's about reimagining a world where developing nations are not set up to fail by global financial systems. It's about ensuring that the sacrifices made by everyday citizens are not in vain. Now is the time to act before the weight of debt and economic stress suffocates another democracy, another nation, another generation. This is the message we should take from Senegal's fight, and the call to action that is urgently needed, not just in Africa, but across the world. Thank you for following this analysis. Stay tuned for more, and remember, the choices we make today will define the world we live in tomorrow.